So thanks for coming tonight. This is an awesome turnout. This is a great topic. And I think that, there's a number of you in the room that along the way, we've had conversations with, we've heard things from you that said, hey, this is a topic that we really need to bring, and we really need to find the right people to speak into this. So this is like part one of what we think the permanency topic is. And that's because there's so much to cover, and there's no way we could get all the right people in the room for one night and actually get through it all. So we're expecting that in January. We're going to have part two. So if there are unanswered questions tonight, aspects like kinship care that we're not maybe equipped with the right people to cover tonight, and any changes about redesigns that are happening, those things we're planning on having in our January meeting to fully bring, to tie a bow on the topic, I guess. So I'm not going to introduce the panel, but I'm going to set the stage with something that Chelsea said during a zone board meeting that kind of hit me different. I've been fostering since 2018-ish, I think, maybe something like that. That sounds right, doesn't it? Yeah. We're going to go with it. 2018. She said, why would you ever want a kid to have TPR if they didn't have a permanency plan in place, if there wasn't an identified permanency plan in place? And I went, whoa, wait a minute. I thought it was like there's a number of days and then we consider TPR. We start having that conversation and doing concurrent planning. And it hit me that I was maybe not thinking about things. Reunification's the goal, right? But a permanency plan is something that we have to have no matter what. And the permanency plan might be reunification, but it could also be other things. And so this lovely panel is going to tackle some of those things tonight. And I want you guys to introduce yourself because I do a bad job doing it. So I'm going to pass the microphone all the way down, and then I will help facilitate some of the questions tonight. But as an audience, we want to make sure your questions are answered. If we can't answer the question tonight, we're going to put it on the list for next time and get that question answered. So please feel free to raise your hand and ask questions along the way, and ignore any screaming children that are having total fun in the treehouse.
Hi, just thank you for having me. My name is Amanda Harris, and I appreciate all of you and the role you play as foster parents and workers. So thanks for having me. I've been a foster parent with my husband. That's my husband right there, Brian. Brian works at YCC, but shout out to Brian. Okay. We've been foster parents for 14 years, and I'm an attorney, a local attorney. I own Harris Law Office on Main Street in Mandan. And so I've done some adoption work and guardianship work. And so that's why I'm here today. We've also adopted a teenager from foster care, and we have guardianship of her little brother. So that's why we're here, and I'm happy to answer any questions you guys have.
I'm Barb Oliger, and I'm the director for the state for the Guardian at Litem program, and have worked up through the ranks. I was started when the program started in Bismarck, and have been the supervisor and recently appointed as the director. And I'm happy to be here, and I know several of the faces in the crowd, and hopefully there's no heckling.
To be fair, I invited Barb 2 hours ago, so please don't heckle her. Peggy Netzer, foster care supervisor for Burleigh County Human Service Zone. Filling in for our director who was supposed to be here, so don't heckle me either, please.
My name is Becky Moser. I am a foster mom, adoptive mom, but I'm here tonight representing AASK.
And I'm Julie Hoffman. I'm the adoptions manager. I've worked in the county in years past at the Human Service Zone. I also was a foster parent in the 80s and 90s and adopted from foster care. Our adopted son is now, I got to do the math, 32. Wow.
I'm in the middle. Okay, so I'm not gonna make you. Okay, so maybe unpack for us a little bit about just understanding how we're getting to a plan. Talk a little bit about
So we'll just start with the hard stuff right up front, you mean? Okay, cool. All right. So if you have had a foster kid, you know that every 3 months, 90 days or less, we have a child and family team meeting where everybody comes together. When we take custody of a kid, we have those meetings within the first 30 days. So within that first 30 days, the case manager is doing a whole lot of work. They're getting kids to all the required appointments. They're setting up school and transportation and doctors and therapies and all the things, right? You know that if you've had a fresh placement. We also are assessing the family needs. We're doing relative searches. We're trying to find someone that is connected to this kid that we can place them with besides a stranger, essentially, when we're putting them in a foster home. So we're doing all of that behind the scenes. When we have child and family team meetings, we have to have a goal. All the time, our goal starts as reunification. Only time it wouldn't be is if we have no parents, right? We have no parents at all. Let's say mom and dad get killed in some sort of tragic accident and the child is an orphan. We would not have reunification. But other than that, we have reunification. We have to look at timeliness. So timeliness goals. If we are looking at reunification as our only goal, we like to have that achieved within the first 12 months of having custody. If we have had custody for 12 months and we do not have reunification happening, like let's say there's like no progress at all, at that point, we add a concurrent goal. So concurrent goal means we have reunification and something else that we are working on simultaneously. It doesn't mean we abandon reunification to focus on the other goal. Doesn't mean we add the other goal and ignore it and keep working on reunification. It means we're doing both things at the same time.
When the goal, when you have reunification as the primary goal and you add a concurrent goal of adoption, there are times in meetings where we talk about reunification as the primary and the secondary of adoption. And there are other times we talk about reunification or adoption as the primary, reunification as the second. How does that?
Trick question. Okay, so we can talk about that, yes. So it depends on the case. If there is progress towards reunification, we might have adoption as our concurrent goal, but we might not file for TPR right away. Because if that parent is actively working on reunification, we aren't going to get a TPR. So we're not going to make everybody go through that process and not have a TPR, okay? So if the parent is absolutely not doing anything, which they wouldn't if we were filing for TPR, we can say sometimes, I think it's verbiage, Barb. So concurrent plan is concurrent plan. We don't have primary and secondary goals. I know people sometimes say that, and they used to be called primary and secondary goals, but they're not. They're now concurrent goals. We work on both. In our area, and I would assume across the state, you don't remove reunification, especially if it's an ICWA case, until TPR. So we have to, as workers, continue making active efforts towards reunification until that TPR is granted. So that means that your worker is doing all the stuff to get a TPR and working with AASK to do all the adoption paperwork and all the other things, but at the same time has to still be trying to have visits with bio parents, have family searches still going out. We're still reaching out to relatives, not just because we're looking for someone to adopt that kid, but also because if the family is out there and they can't adopt, maybe they can be a resource for whoever is adopting that child, right? Maybe they can send birthday gifts or somehow help maintain that connection. Okay. Semantics is the answer. Primary and secondary, we don't do that. We call it concurrent because we should be working on both at the same time. I think there's never been this many people here, so I'm like a little bit off my game here. But in the past, I have said that we've had a lot of changes over the last few years. Some of that is in the wording, some of that is in how we do our work. Right now, we are in the middle of adoption redesign. Julie and I are both on that work group for the state. And so over the next few months, you're going to see some fairly big changes in how adoption happens and what goes into that in North Dakota. And I, knowing almost all of you and your situations, I think you're going to be really happy with what's coming down. You wanted to know why we choose certain goals. Is that what it was? What are our options? What are the permanency options? We have reunification. We have adoption. Everybody knows what that is. We have guardianship. Everybody know what that is? No. Okay. Thank you. Tesher's going to be honest over here. So guardianship is a permanency option. Okay. It's not that you are the guardian forever. Amanda has a kid, B. They have a kid that they are the guardian of. Guardianships are granted for 3 years. At the end of that 3 years, you have to go back to court and say, hey, we still need to be this kid's guardian. Or you say, hey, the parent is doing really good. We don't need to have this kid anymore. He can go home. Guardianships are not permanent. They used to, in the state of North Dakota, be able to grant a guardianship to age 18. They don't do that anymore. 3 years is the max. Essentially, though, that child is your child. I've been in their home. They would never, ever refer to the child they have guardianship of as any different than any other kid in that home. They're all their children. Okay. So sometimes people think, well, if we adopt, then they're ours. If you do guardianship, they're also your kids. Yeah, we're out. Okay. Adoption and guardianship, no social services. You don't have a case manager coming to your house, checking on your stuff, looking at your kid. We're out. You make all decisions. You do everything on your own. Guardianship, no team meetings. That's a bonus. Guardianship, adoption, reunification, APLA, APPLA, another planned permanent living arrangement. Thank you, Barb. We call it APLA because that's a lot to remember. Essentially, if a kid is 16, 14, no, 15, 16. Thank you, Kenny. That's why I brought him as my +1. 16, when they're 16, they can choose APLA, which means they don't want to be adopted. They don't want to do a guardianship. They just want to stay in a home where they feel comfortable until they age out of foster care. Can't choose that until their 16th birthday, though. So if you got a kid that's 14 and stubborn, they got to wait. We're still working on another plan. Okay. But
if you're a certain age and you do not want to be adopted, they will not pursue adoption termination for that child.
age 10. Did you guys all hear that? When a kid is age 10, we will not choose adoption as their permanency goal if that child is adamant that they do not want to be adopted. Up until age 10, they don't get a say. But when they're 10 and older, they absolutely do. There are, Julie, we just looked at it yesterday, 6 reasons why we wouldn't choose adoption as a goal, and that is one of them. However,
when you're asking a child if they want to be adopted and the option is by an unknown family that they've never met, that they know nothing about, it's really not a fair question to a 10-year-old. So the adults that are making decisions on behalf of a child need to take that into consideration. And if a child is staunchly saying, no, I don't want to be adopted, but they don't know what that means and they don't know who that is, you know, we need to help them understand what the option could look like.
They don't get to pick who they get adopted by. We do that as the custodians. They can absolutely weigh in, and they should, yes. If they are connected to their foster parents and they say, I want to be adopted by my foster parents, then we would 100% consider that. If they say, I really don't like these people, please get me out of here and find me a new family that I can be with forever, we're definitely listening to that one, right? Exactly. Age appropriate. We have a question back there, but I'm going to say the last one before I forget it, because there's another one. And this is one that we here have not used until October. I think we filed it, but we didn't have court until October. Yeah. So it's placement with a relative. So living with a relative. This is one that is new to us. It's new to our court system, but it's not a new goal for the state as a whole. It just wasn't done here. It's one that we use not often. Generally, it's for kids who are placed with relatives and living on the reservation, or kids who are placed with relatives and their bio parent is willing to sign a power of attorney so that their relative can have that for 6 months while they work on guardianship. Okay. It's essentially us saying, you as a family have got this. You don't need us. We are not providing any services to any of those families if we are choosing that as our permanency goal. We had a lot of explaining to do in the court, but I think we're on a path where if that is appropriate, and most of you know that before we take custody of kids, that's what we try to do, right? We try to put them with a relative. We look for anybody that they might know. So it makes sense that if we can do that before we take custody, we should be able to do the same thing after we take custody if that's the best thing for the kids. So those are our permanency goals.
After the first 12 months, you set up a concurrent goal. Is that like immediately after 12 months, or like is it the first team meeting afterwards? Yeah, because we have a child who is past 12 months, but between the two of us, we don't know that there's a concurrent goal set up for him. So when does that? Yeah, when does it actually happen? Is what I'm asking.
So we have the initial child and family team meeting within the first 30 days. So your 12-month meeting is actually happening usually around 13 months. But as a member of that team, you should know what your kid's permanency goal is. And if you don't, you should be asking because, yeah. Okay, there might not be one. If there's progress towards reunification, we may not add a concurrent goal. We will always have the conversation around, do we need to add a concurrent goal, but we don't always do it. Yes. Was that going to be your question, Leslie? So the question was, please explain why sometimes you get to 12 months and you're not ready to add a concurrent goal yet. Especially if it's a TPR and adoption goal, because that's a really serious thing. It's traumatic for a kid. It's traumatic for foster parents. It's traumatic for us as workers. It's traumatic for the family. We try to avoid TPR and adoption as much as possible. And this is something that you've seen if you've been in Burleigh County for a while, we've had a lot of turnover. We are in a real good place right now, but it took a while to rebuild to get to this point. If your case manager left for whatever reason and had the case, let's say for 9 months, there was no concurrent goal added. A new case manager has to start from scratch, essentially, with active efforts, with all the things, and try to do what the previous case manager didn't. So we basically start over. So if your case manager left at 9 months, your new case manager would take at least 6 months to get that rapport with the family, work on reunification, all of those things before they would be able to testify in court that they did enough active efforts, right? We can't just say, oh yeah, I've had this case for 2 weeks. I did all the things. We're ready for TPR. We won't get it. And like I said before, we're not going to go in that courtroom if we don't believe we're going to get it, because it trashes your relationships, and we don't take that lightheartedly. She said, do we feel that's fair for the kids?
Yes and no. I think there are times where you have had maybe a case manager that the relationship has been so corroded between the biological parents, and a new person comes on with fresh eyes and they rebuild that relationship, and you see a lot more progress with the new person. Then it's fair. When the biological parent says, you know, the case manager was a liar and didn't do anything and promised us all this stuff, and we find out with the new case manager, boy, maybe that probably wasn't truthful either, and they haven't made any more progress. Does it take longer? Yes. Is it fair to the kid at that point? Probably not. How do we know though until we try at that point? Yes. Consider that same situation in a divorce case. And if the court orders a child to go, you really have to make every effort to follow that court order and to try to make that relationship. I certainly would look towards the therapist if there was one on where things were at. We have had judges send kids home. Kids have been adamant, I am going to kill myself tonight if you send me home. And the judge says, yeah, there isn't any reason that you're telling me you will kill yourself. You're going home. And they walk out with that parent at that court hearing. There are sometimes we advocate that child not go home, because obviously that's I just had this situation and it was no. And this child was very adamant, and there were a lot of concerns about the relationship and the parenting that had gone on, and the court just said, yeah, go home. So there's times where if the court is ordering visitation, to make every attempt to facilitate that with safeguards and with parameters and with lots of reporting to the social worker. This went well, this didn't go well, I couldn't get him out the door. I mean, you're not going to wrestle a 14-year-old, but having those ongoing conversations about what can make you feel safer. Can we start with phone calls? Can we do some video stuff? Can we do it in the park? Can I be there to help see how that visitation will go?
Amanda, talk to us about adoption and guardianship in your house and what that looks like practically or differently, and kind of help people understand if they're considering one or the other, just the differences, maybe the risk, reward, pros, cons. Give us the down and dirty.
Okay, sounds good. So our the kids we had, they were a sibling group actually. So we had 4 kids at different times. They all had different goals and they all had TPRs at different times too. So it kind of complicates the situation, but the oldest one had already aged out and moved out of state. Kids went back home, they came back into care, and that's how we got these younger 2 siblings. So they had went home for a period of time. And so they had been in foster care for years at that point already with multiple different families. Our daughter, so that when she came, she was 13 and the little one was 18 months, her little brother, and they had siblings in other places as well. But after 3 years, then we started thinking we're going to need a permanency. I mean, we were already thinking permanency plan, but we didn't know what it was going to be, right? So because at that time she was 16, I just kind of left the decision up to her. I was like, what do you want to do? What do you want this to look like? She still had hope for reunification, and she struggled personally with, we talked a lot about the pros and cons of adoption and guardianship and, just aging out of foster care and it really took her a long time. Her other siblings were like, reunification's never going to happen. Like, get over it. Like her older siblings were like, never happened. It's not going to happen for you. Like, I'm like, get over it. But she personally struggled because she, had that, I guess, a little more hope than some of the other kids did. So every kid is so unique and so different. And it took her a while because she did say, like, I don't want adoption to send a message that I'm giving up on my mom, that I don't want to send that message to her that I'm giving up on her. And so like we how to process that, talk about that. We talked about guardianship. And in the end, I said, it's just paperwork. Like, you're literally our kid. You're going to be our kid forever. Like, I don't care what you decide. It's not going to make me think of you in any other light, any differently. She saw that some of our other old kids, they still come home. They still bring their kids home for Christmas and holidays. So I was like, you're going to be the same. Like, you're a kid regardless of what you decide. Anyway, she decided to move forward with adoption, but she did waffle a lot. She wasn't always sure. And, there's a lot of decision making. We had to weigh in on what her name was going to be, if she wanted to change her name. And so she was like, maybe for a while there, she was on a kick that it was going to be Nigel Thornberry for her new name. And, so there's just a lot. And I was like, come on, like, be serious. And so she decided adoption. And I was just thinking, like, it's just paperwork, no big deal, right? And at our court hearing, it was during COVID. So we did a Zoom court hearing, and she started crying, and it came to the time. So this goes to the consent thing too. Anytime you're going through the adoption process in the court hearing, if it's a 10-year-old or older, they have to testify in front of the judge and consent to wanting to be adopted. So the judge, yes, by the people who are there at the hearing with you. So it's a little different because if a child says, yes, I want them to adopt me, they don't actually ever say that to a judge, right? It's literally only your only chance to say no, like, no, I don't want to be adopted. And the judge asked her, like, are you consenting to this adoption? And she started crying. And I was like, she's not going to do it. She's not, because literally the night before I was like, are you sure? And she's like, I don't know. And then I was like, she's not going to do it. And then she did consent. And then the judge is like, why are you crying? What are you thinking? And she said, I'm just so happy. And she was crying tears of joy. So I'm like, thank God, like, I was like, oh no. So we did that adoption. Her younger brother, he actually, at the same time, they were in our house at the same time, he was reunified with a parent. So while we were adopting her, he was reunified with a parent. They had different dads, same mom. So he was reunified with a dad. And the custody order, it's a little different than most of you. If you went through adoption or a guardianship, you're going to do guardianship with the county, which then the county's attorney will help you with the guardianship and do the guardianship for you. Ours was a private guardianship. So what happened is we still maintained contact. We had siblings, and about a year into that reunification, we realized it was not a safe environment for the younger one. And his mom dropped him off at our house and said, you need to keep him safe. And so when we called the county, they were like, no, we're not getting involved. He's safe with you. You'll have to do this privately. So we had to hire an attorney and petition the court to seek guardianship. So we did it privately, which is not the case if you already have like a permanency plan through the county to do guardianship. Their county attorney will help you do that. But if you do a private guardianship, which is common in my practice, we do private guardianships all the time. The most common scenarios are probably like grandparents taking guardianship of grandchildren if parents are on drugs or having mental health issues. Goes to prison, really can be for anything. So, and in our specific case, the grandma also did petition for guardianship as well. So it was a little unique, but so like Barb said, the max you can get for a guardianship is 3 years. I think the main difference is when you have an adoption, parental rights are terminated. But when you adopt a 16-year-old, their parental rights really are never terminated, right? They always know who their parents are. They always, want those family connections. And I think that's important. And I think that's why the parents of our kids were supportive of adoption, we're supportive of guardianship, because we do maintain relationships. But when you do adoption, it's up to you as the adoptive parents to what kind of contact you're going to allow or what boundaries you have. Some of the siblings were adopted to other families and they didn't allow sibling contact. So those children were cut off from their siblings, which was very difficult for the kids that we had in our home to lose those. It's hard enough to have an adoption and lose your parents, but it's a whole new level of trauma when you lose your siblings as well. So I'm a huge supporter of, even if there's an adoption, even if there's a guardianship, and guardianship, the parents retain parental rights. So in our case, the judge can order a parenting plan, which is like what visitation is going to look like. They're supposed to, yeah. It's like a divorce case, like co-parenting, right? We have co-parents. In our case, we don't, it's kind of just left up to us to figure out what that's going to look like. So it varies from case to case. Like Barb said, the longest you can have is 3 years. So after that 3 years or before, if the parents petition and say, we've corrected the defect, or like it's called deprivation, like, if they're been neglectful or failed to provide for the child, if they corrected those things and they can show the court that they have the stability, that it would be in the child's best interest, they can terminate that guardianship early if they can show to the court. Otherwise, if you don't renew it, it expires and then custody would go back to the parents because they still have parental rights. I don't know. Yeah. Oh, okay.
No.
So Kelly asked, you have guardianship of a kid and you get a great job in California and you got to move. What happens to that child? Just in general, Kelly's not going to California. But that's when the guardianship is granted through the court system, that is essentially your child. To a certain extent, yes. They can, if it depends what your order says, really, but they would have to petition the court and convince the court that it's not in that child's best interest to remain in your family. Yeah.
In the private guardianships that you petition without the zone's involvement, most of those orders are going to say, if you move out of state, you have to get permission from the court to do so. And so you will come back to court and have usually a guardian ad litem is appointed. They make a recommendation, yes or no, I think this is in the best interest. Mom hasn't seen this child in 3 years. There's another 3 years guardianship. But I'm in a drag out right now with a grandpa who doesn't want his grandson to move, and grandma moved, and now he's filing police reports and CPS reports. So that is a private one. So there's
a difference.
Yep. But if it is a private guardianship, that typically is going to be in there or should be in there. And it is up to the court. It was very clear with the people that are moving out of state that is your responsibility, and you will bear the cost of continuing that relationship with the biological parent if that is there.
So if you have guardianship, there's no reason you can't petition for a TPR on your own. That can happen. It doesn't have to go through the county or anybody else. If you have guardianship and you know that that parent is not going to get it together, and you have communication with that parent and they agree, like, yeah, you should adopt this kid, you can do that on your own. Because once the guardianship is awarded, we are out. Remember, we're out. So you're on your own. If you want to move and that bio parent is not connected to the child at all, they're not going to object. When you have a guardianship, you do have to file a report every year with the court that says, yes, I still have this kid. Yes, they're still okay. Yes, we still want to have a guardianship. At the end of the 3 years, you have to go back in front of the court and say same thing. Yes, we still want this child. Yes, this is still the best place for them. If at any time during the guardianship, anybody wants to be that kid's guardian or the parents want to terminate your guardianship, they can petition the court. It doesn't mean they're going to win, but they can petition the court at any time.
You also need to check the rules of the state that you're moving to. You can file or register your guardianship with that state. Some states accept that. Some states say, no, we want you to reestablish that guardianship in our state. So we have authority over that, and not North Dakota again.
It's just like custody. So like shared custody, like a divorce, right? Like we share custody with parents, right? Even though the parents don't see our kid. But so it brings in a lot of unique situations. Like, can we leave the country on vacation? Can we get a passport? So we took our kid to Canada and we brought all our passports look different. And one kid has a different name and they're like, whose kid is this? And I was like, let's just see if we can get him through without like explaining the whole situation. And then they're like, whose kid is this? And I'm like, I brought the guardianship papers. And they like literally looked over the judgment and then they're like, okay, you're good to go. But it brings in a lot of interesting questions because it's like parents still do have parental rights. So there is a lot of like muddiness. Yeah, there's a lot of.
Do you, Julie? Okay, so it's not Julie's program. So there are options for subsidized guardianship in the state of North Dakota. If you are considering guardianship, I highly encourage you to talk to your case manager about that option. I'm not going to go into all the things that may or may not get you a subsidy, but there are opportunities for that.
Okay, well, we're gonna do that. Do you need to petition the court to move that child out of state in a non-private guardianship? And does ICWA apply to guardianships?
ICWA applies to everything.
But it actually, let me answer this. So ICWA actually only applies if the state removed the child. So if the state removed, because if it's like a custody thing, ICWA doesn't apply. ICWA doesn't come in. If it's like custody between parents or a custody issue, then ICWA doesn't apply. But if the state removed the child, then ICWA applies.
In Bismarck, our referees are taking every case as an ICWA case, even if it's private guardianship or private TPR. Then the tribes are being notified and get to wait.
Okay.
Say it again, Barb.
I mean, I do have an example of this. I'll tell an example. There was a guardianship white aunt and uncle to guardianship of a Native American child that they didn't know was Native American. They had guardianship for 10 years. Then the dad filed that the child be enrolled in a tribe. The child was enrolled. Dad petitioned to end the guardianship. It was an all-out mess because the child was 12, wanted to stay in the guardianship, wanted to be adopted, and his sibling was adopted, but he couldn't be because the tribe wouldn't allow or consent. And the court did take away that guardianship, but it got so messy, you guys, because the court did take away that guardianship and said, because you're ICWA kid, and because all these other rules apply, no more guardianship. And so custody went back to the parents. And in that particular case, they had a custody order from 12 years prior when dad was in prison and mom was granted custody. So that kid went back to mom under the custody and mom didn't want the kid. So she sent him back to aunt and uncle. And now the kid is living with aunt and uncle with no guardianship and nothing.
In Bismarck, Mandan, our referees use ICWA applies in guardianships, private guardianships as well. And we have to have a QEW in those cases. Qualified expert witness, whenever it's a Native American child, you need a qualified expert witness that is knowledgeable in the culture and religion customs of the tribe, and child rearing practices, and that they need to testify that the parent's behavior is not acceptable and that behavior would cause harm to that child, and they need to give their blessing for the guardianship to go through.
And every tribe has their own QEW.
Yes, there are some that have been given the authority from different tribes. No, a guardian ad litem is appointed for any child that is removed through a deprivation hearing. And we are appointed during, typically 99% of the time, only during the court action. Once the 12 months is granted, then our order is vacated and we no longer have any authority or ability to gather information. The guardian ad litem is only appointed during the court action. If there's like a petition has been filed either for initial removal or for termination, we are only appointed during that time. Once the judge has ruled, unless they appoint us to remain on a case, we are off. It is the bottom line of the court order says the order of the guardian ad litem terminates as of today.
Okay.
I was just wondering if you could touch on what guardianship looks like when the tribe is involved for the foster parent since the county is no longer involved.
I think it depends on each individual tribe and their particular organization, like how they're organized and how involved they are. Some tribes are like, go be in peace and do your thing. And some tribes are very involved. So it just really depends on who's.
I knew this was coming. Okay. MHA, 3 affiliated tribes, however we want to call it. There's a lot of question marks over people's heads because they have MHA kids and they're wondering, why can't we adopt these children? So the reason is if their biological family has mineral rights or oil money or whatever you want to call it, because of their tribal affiliation, those children, if their parental rights are terminated, their future inheritance is also terminated. So, yes. Terminates all of it. Right. Right. Yes. So Julie said the termination terminates that, not the adoption. But yes. So when your parental rights are terminated, you lose your right to inheritance from your biological family. Some of our kids, our MHA kids, are set to inherit a lot of money, tens of thousands of dollars every month. And terminating their parental rights would then have a massive impact on their future financially. So with kids who are enrolled with MHA, the tribe staffs it and they tell us guardianship or adoption. Some of those kids can be adopted. And some of you in this room have those kids that can be adopted because their inheritance is not an issue. Some of them will only have guardianship as an option. They will not have TPR and adoption because that would negatively impact them in adulthood, and the tribe is not going to do that. None of us should want to do that, right? Like nobody wants to negatively impact kids' future. So
Just to add something, there is also historically, Standing Rock and MHA historically have not been in favor of termination of parental rights and adoption. That's part of their culture. It's a cultural issue. Turtle Mountain and Spirit Lake have been much more inclined to look at that, but it's a historical thing. It's not just about money, but that does power a lot of it today.
So that was kind of a new thing. When did your TPR happen? April. It was at the TPR for Kelly's baby that it came about. It was a change in the guidance from the tribe at that point in April. So it's all pretty new to us. We've been trying to navigate it as a system, but that's what it's down to right now, is that each kid that we have who is enrolled or eligible for enrollment with MHA will be staffed individually. You might have a sibling group, and if they have the same mom and the mom is the reason they're, Standing Rock or whatever, and dad for two of them is MHA, and those kids are enrolled in MHA, the one that's Standing Rock can be adopted. The other two might not. So it's a hard thing to navigate. We're all doing our best. I feel like our communication with the ICWA at MHA is pretty good. She gets back to us quickly. She explains things in a way that's really easy to understand. She comes to most of our child and family team meetings so that we can talk through our options. But MHA kids, it's an additional layer that we have to consider. It might, but it's out of our control. So yes. Yes. You have to sign an agreement with the tribe before they will approve for you to be the adoptive family. You have to agree to their terms. And if you don't want to, then they will fight tooth and nail for you to not be the adoptive family. Barb said the court can overrule ICWA. They can. It doesn't happen very often. Once that I know of, very recently. Once. But for the most part, the court will not overrule ICWA.
I have you talk on this.
In our situation, in our TPR meeting, it was announced during that time, as Barb was there, that this would most likely be the last TPR that they would have, due to the gas and the oil and the Bakken land up there. But when we had to have it notarized at the county that we would agree to the MHA standards that they wanted in place for the child that we're adopting. And we have to make like active efforts to take her to cultural events. And for us, working with MHA and with Ms. Fox on there, it's been very positive. She's been very receptive to us. We've been receptive with her. We've had, we really have had no issues, even through the whole 20 months that we had her. It's like the tribe understood where this kid came from, and that reunification probably wouldn't happen because there was such a track record here. But they did what they had to do. The county did what they had to do, and then we just had to wait. And unfortunately, we get to adopt her on December 4th, and that's a great thing. But they have made sure that we have signed, and they put it into their district court in Newtown on file, that we will keep her. We will keep her in MHA. We will update them when anything changes, and we agree to it. But they don't really go away. But if you do have an MHA kid, I will say they are pleasant to work with. They do get back to you. I've emailed her. She's gotten back to us. We have had no problems with MHA, but they are changing it because we realize that the one that we have could possibly have a sibling. And what will that look like if we've been able to adopt the one we have now? Would we be able to adopt that one, or would that just be a guardianship? So that's what.
Yeah, and when you say something, could you also just say, does a foster parent need an attorney when the state is filing for a foster parent to get guardianship?
No, the county has their own state's attorney that does guardianships and adoptions. All the TPRs, termination of parental rights. But if you have a private guardianship or you want a private adoption, it would be like, I mean, I do adoptions too for us. Yeah. Yep. Do you want to say that?
Yeah, Julie.
For a public agency adoption, the family would hire the attorney to facilitate the actual adoption. Termination would already have happened.
Public agency. Public agency is the zone, the tribe, or DJS, which is Department of Juvenile Services. Any public entity that has custody of a child, the state's attorney or the attorney that entity has would facilitate that TPR and guardianship. But the person, people, family who are adopting the child has their own attorney for the adoption piece, but that's reimbursed. Not tribe.
Okay, so with adoptions, when people hire me to do their adoption cases, I just wanted to make a distinction too with ICWA, because people are, I think, freaking out about ICWA now. You may have a Native American child, and ICWA may not apply if they're not eligible to be enrolled somewhere. So I just wanted to say that because there are some Native American children who are not eligible to be enrolled, and so ICWA does not apply. And sometimes judges get confused. So this is an adoption story. I did an adoption for one of the siblings that the sister to our adoptive daughter, and the guardianship they have a sister out there, and I got to be the attorney for her adoption. And her family, she's being adopted by relatives, and they live in Newtown, and the relatives are enrolled at MHA, but she was not eligible to be enrolled at MHA because of bloodlines. So they actually enrolled her in Newtown, or not, they live in Newtown. They enrolled her in Turtle Mountain. So it gets a little confusing, but just because where they live doesn't mean that's where they're enrolled. You actually have to look at their enrollment paperwork, because the judge was confused. Like, they live in Newtown. Why aren't you bringing me MHA paperwork? What's this irrelevant Turtle Mountain paperwork? You know, like it's sometimes, yeah, judges sometimes even get confused on what's actually required and what's needed. So that's what that. So when you're hiring an attorney, those fees are refundable. I give a discount when I do adoptions for people for foster care, FYI, because I don't want foster parents to have to pay extra out of pocket. So my fee is whatever you get reimbursed is my fee. If you're just coming in off the street and you're a step parent wanting to adopt your stepchild, then I charge you regular $350 an hour fee. Okay. If you're just a step parent wanting to adopt your stepchild, you get the regular amount. But if you're a foster parent, I know what it's like to be a foster parent, so I want you to not have to pay an out-of-pocket expense. So, and those adoptions can be anywhere, even though that child was a Burley zone kid, but she was living with family in Newtown. So we ended up actually doing her adoption in Ward County because that's where the family had the most people that they wanted to come. So those adoptions are all over the place.
Okay, talk about what it looks like, the adoption. Like, how are we getting from TPR to your desk, essentially? What does that look like, and what's all? Becky might want to talk first. Yeah.
I am the middleman between their office and her office. Yes. Okay, so once concurrent plan is added, someone from ASK will start joining the meetings. That doesn't mean adoption is going to happen. Team meetings, sorry. It doesn't necessarily mean adoption is going to happen. It doesn't mean TPR is going to happen. But the second that concurrent goal is added, we tag along. And we have one worker on staff that's primarily what she does is sit in those meetings. Or Ambry has a lot of meetings. So we're following along so we know what's going on with the case if termination happens. Ambry is on every case manager's back on paperwork because the second there's a concurrent goal, we are wanting the paperwork because if termination happens, we want to be able to move as quickly as possible. And certain things just take a really long time. So we want as much in our hands before that happens. Termination happens, then they get assigned to a different worker, or sometimes Amber keeps them, but for the most part, they get transferred to Maria and I, and we do the home assessments and we're doing all of the kids' paperwork, gathering records. Honest guys, waiting for Sanford to give records is like months, people. So that's why we want to get the information as soon as we can so we can try to get as much as we can. Why do we want the kids' birth records? Adoption finalizes. Those records are closed. You're never going to know how much they weighed when they were born. You're never going to know if they were in the NICU for how long, for what. It's really, really crucial to have as much history as you can. Therapy records. Some places will still give you things, some won't. Hospitals, they're closed. So that's why we fight so hard to get that information. All of our adoptions are subsidized. So we have to deem them, I hate the term, special needs. Special needs is child of minority race over the age of 7, sibling group, mental health diagnosis. We have this like adoption form and the doctor can say this child is high risk. Being in foster care, not living with family is high risk because they're not in their natural home environment. So we can always, I've never seen one not be special needs. Okay, well, she's been around longer than
For kids, it would be the kids who don't qualify as special needs for the purposes of adoption assistance would be a child that's under the age of 2, where a doctor was not willing to sign that high risk statement. It has to be a medical professional that signs that statement saying that they're at risk because of their birth circumstances or their placement in foster care. So if a medical professional doesn't sign that, they're not being placed together with a sibling, they're not of minority race. If they don't meet one of those criteria, then they would not qualify as special needs for the purposes of adoption assistance. AASK could still serve them and serve you in terms of doing the home study and the child work and all of those kinds of things, but you would not qualify for the subsidy supports, including the non-reoccurring expense reimbursement.
So we have a whole bunch of paperwork that we have to do to deem them special needs. Sorry, it's a lot of paperwork. Kenny just made me do a whole lot of work this past week, so my brain is a little fried. It's literally packets and packets of information. And unfortunately, Julie gets every single packet in the state. So when we have a busy day, Julie has like a really busy day because there's quite a few of us ASK workers in North Dakota. During the time where we're doing all of this stuff with the kids and the kids' paperwork, that's when we're doing your home assessments. there was a time where we started home assessments before TPR went through. That no longer happens. So in 2020, we were really slow. And so we had the time to kind of work ahead a little bit. But it kind of got us because then TPRs weren't granted, kids were reunified, and then you have these families with these approved home studies and no kids for an adoption. We will not start your home study until we hear that TPR has been granted. I believe that's pretty firm. I don't think it's going to change. It might change. Everything that I'm saying could change start in January because our program is completely flipping. So
we are working on a potential, me and Julie, a potential second option for that. So right now, yes, that is the case, but it might change.
and some tribes give those ICWA letters really quickly and some they don't. Some of the ICWA workers want letters from the biological parents stating that they are okay with the adoptive family adopting their children before they will sign the ICWA letter. I have a question to your question. Is your kid a tribal case or county case? Okay. So technically the custodian is Cass County? Yeah, I guess I'm not sure what application they're talking about. The only thing that I can think of is if they're working on enrollment, because we don't want to move forward with an adoption until the child is enrolled, because doing it after an adoption is really hard.
My legal perspective, but if you do adopt a child from foster care, I'm not sure if it has to be, I don't even think it has to be designated as a special needs adoption, because in the federal code, it's already special needs. If it's from foster care, you get a substantial tax relief benefit credit. So make sure to tell your accountant that you had an adoption in your family in that year, that you adopted from foster care, because it makes a huge difference. And a lot of people don't know that that benefit or that relief, that federal tax relief, is out there.
Joel's question is about APPLA. I'm not going to say what that is again. And when that might be an appropriate option. Did you guys have any APPLA kids? Yeah. So, oh yeah, you did. Look at B's face. He's like, they B doesn't know. He's just like, oh, there's kids around. So APPLA, like I said before, they have to be 16. Generally, they are kids who have a very strong opinion about their connection to their biological family. And also kids who we don't have anyone identified who wants to be their guardian or really wants to adopt them. But we do have people that will like hang on to them for a while. So we do APPLA in those cases. It's essentially you're having this kid in your home until they turn 18 and we have custody is really what it is.
We got a girl at 17 and a half. So she had been in some group homes, other foster homes. We already knew that was her permanent goal when she moved in with us. They're like, she is not signing herself back into foster care. She's aging out at 18. Can you take her for 6 months? And when she came, she already had her driver's license. She already was a CNA. She pretty much had it together, but what kid can go live on their own when they're 18, right? She needed help with an apartment, setting up. She did the classes, the independent living classes. They had an independent living coach that worked with her to help her, with budgeting and setting up a checkbook and having checking accounts and savings account. And so, so it really literally was helping her get set up an apartment, being there to support her in transitioning to be an independent liver.
I have a young man who was adopted at 4 and his adoptive parents turned him back at 6 and had some significant mental health issues and has been in and out of placements. When he turned 16, obviously that question is always posed to that child. Are you wanting to look at adoption? And he was adamant through the entire from 16 to 18 that he did not want an adoption. That was not something he was going to go down that road again.
Okay. Sure. So if your child, we talked about special needs, that's like the first step in the process. And then also the agency will complete the home study and there's a process of approving that and recommending that that you adopt the child. And then the AASK worker will refer you to the adoption subsidy unit, which is right now called the CFS Foster Care Subadopt Unit, which is a state program. So we have 3 adoption subsidy workers. They do this all virtually now, and they will contact you. They'll have information that they'll provide for you about subsidy and negotiate the subsidy amount and so forth and come to an agreement. You sign an agreement. And then AASK will then move forward, make the formal adoptive placement. Sometimes that means a change in location for a child if they're being placed into a new home. Most of the time it's not. They're being adopted by the same people that have been caring for them in foster care or a relative. And then you move pretty quickly toward finalization if that child has already been in your home. Adoption subsidy is available if the child has been designated as a child with special needs. Yes, we have had a couple of kids. Probably each year there may be 1 or 2 that don't qualify. But as I said, AASK can still work through the adoption process. The child would not qualify for adoption subsidy support. Adoption subsidy support can be 3 different, take 3 different things. One is a monthly amount that's similar to your foster care stipend. The second would be Medicaid, that's a backup to your private health insurance. And then the third is reimbursement of the non-reoccurring expenses of adoption. That is limited to $2,000 per child. So as Amanda said, but that includes all of those non-reoccurring. Right, which includes attorney fees, but also includes an application fee for AASK, the cost of criminal background checks, any testing that's required. It could, if you're adopting from out of state, or it could include travel as well. So $2,000 is not a huge amount. And when I started in this many years ago, we rarely hit $2,000. Now we frequently hit $2,000. And sometimes family, and if that would happen, then you would have to eat the additional cost of those expenses. So negotiating the subsidy, as I said, is done virtually with, usually over the phone. you meet the subsidy worker and they will communicate with you either by email or snail mail, however works best for you, to have documents signed, the agreement signed, and so forth. Once you adopt, then you will continue to have contact with that adoption subsidy worker over the years, continue to sign, update the agreements, either every year or every 2 years, kind of depending on what the subsidy looks like, what you've negotiated. Subsidy is generally the equivalent of what the foster care stipend is. It can include an excess maintenance payment. We're looking at that a little differently now than we have in the past. We used to, if a child had an excess maintenance payment in foster care, we would look at the same amount for adoption assistance. Now we're looking at those excess maintenance payments a little differently, and we actually developed a different form that we feel is more specific to adoption, the permanency of adoption, because the former or the foster care, the 1865 is what we call it. You guys all know all the acronyms that we go by, but the 1865 has a lot on it that's really related to foster care, the temporary nature of foster care and the things that you do as a foster parent. And we really wanted that form to reflect the permanency of adoption. You are now the parent and you're parenting a child. So we're looking at things a little bit differently, but if the child qualifies for excess maintenance in foster care, we can also look at that in adoption assistance. And then we also look at childcare. So depending on if you have some of those excess payments, we would review it annually. If not, then it would be every 2 years. So you'd continue to have that kind of connection with the adoption subsidy unit. Subsidy will end when the child reaches age 18. It can option to age 21 if your child continues in school and you continue to provide the information that supports that. So class schedules generally is what we're looking for. Mm-hmm. Well, one of the reasons that we reviewed these forms, the 1865, when Mel and Lacey, and now we have Alexa, those are our 3 sub-adopt negotiators, would sit down and do an appointment with a foster care provider for that 1865, it was an hour. So if you had a family that was adopting 4 kids, that was half a day of one of our sub-adopt negotiators to go through that form. So what we did is develop a form that has a lot more information on it, where you can check a box rather than write a lot of narrative, or rather than the sub-adopt negotiator having to write a lot of narrative. So we tried to make it very specific with lots of information on the form so that you could read through the form, check the boxes. You can do it. You don't have to have an hour-long call with Mel. If she has questions, she can ask you the questions when you have the negotiating meeting. But we really wanted to make a form that was really user-friendly. And we did trial run it with a lot of foster adoptive parents and said, what do you think about this? Give us some feedback. Did you do that for us? Yep. Yeah. I wanted to, right. Right. Yeah.
What she's saying is that that number can ebb and flow as the child ages. So like in my family, I adopted a 2-year-old. We know what his needs are right now. We have absolutely zero idea. Well, we do because we have his older brother, but like we have no idea what needs he's going to have as he ages, and his status and what he needs for services is going to change. So if you find yourself in a situation where you're like, I'm drowning, I need more help, you contact your negotiator and you say, I know we're not up for a renewal, but can we look at this? And they're willing to do it, and you just fill out the paperwork and you meet and you talk about it.
And what I encourage our negotiators to do is to develop a relationship so that at the point that things change for you, either positively or negatively, you can come back and say, you know, we had one family where the child was blind, and we gave them some additional funds at the beginning because she had not been able to get any modifications or any tools to help with the blindness. And no, I don't think it was another family in the eastern part of the state because she's older now. But that family came back for a review and said, you know, because of what you were able to help us with, she is really doing very well now. And we don't need the excess maintenance payment. We were able to do things like do braille labels on a lot of her things. And we were able to do whatever it was. I don't recall all the specifics, but the child was doing much better. And so they came back at the next review and said, we don't feel we need that additional fund. So that's what we want to do, is create that kind of a relationship. So
my question is, what happens when they turn 21 if they still have a lot of needs? Like our son's autistic, so he's likely going to need forever care, right? Like he's probably not going to ever be able to live on his own. What happens then after he turns 21?
So by federal regulation, subsidy can only go to 21. That's it. But when you have a child like that, you should be thinking when that child starts toward, you know, adulthood, you should be applying for SSI. He's got a disability. If it's a lifetime disability, you should be looking at that so that he has that ongoing support. And I would assume that you've got a DD case manager. Well, that's something I would be advocating for, is a DDPM, so that you can have that support and look at what's available, not only as a minor when they're a minor, but into the adult world of the DD system. Yeah. So I wanted to hail back to something that Becky was talking about in terms of gathering all the records. And I know sometimes foster care providers get frustrated by this because they think it's a lot of paperwork. But I can tell you, I am the adoptive parent of a now 32. And we adopted him when he was 6. And he was in foster care, but he was not in foster care with us. So he was a new placement into our home. And over the years, he has established a relationship with his biological mother and his biological father, and he has siblings. And it has created questions for him. We've not been opposed to that at all. His biological mother is pretty much in the same situation that she was when he was taken into care 30 years ago. His biological father operates pretty well, but he was never given an opportunity. So child welfare looked way different 30 years ago than it does today. But one of the things that when we adopted him, we got an envelope full of records, redacted. Some of them were redacted, some of them weren't. And he has asked, you know, periodically, Mom, what about this? Or what about that? Or what about, and I go back to the records and I look at it, and this is my world, right? I do this. But I look at him and when he asks these questions and I think, God, I wish Becky would have been able to do a child adoption assessment for him, which is something that you get now, which is not identified. It's got a summary of all the information that AASK has gotten about his birth, his schooling, his biological parents, his relatives, how many placements he was in, all of those kinds of things. Because for my son, Trent, there are big holes. He doesn't know. I don't have a history of all of his placements. I can't tell him. Well, no, I can't tell him because there were no systems even that I could inadvertently look into. Yeah, there was nothing. And the paper doesn't tell the story, right? And so that's the purpose of waiting on Sanford for those records, is to get all that information so that they can develop. First of all, you'll get the redacted records if you're adopting, but you'll also get a summary that makes sense. My son has some disabilities. He is not considered DD, but he's lower functioning. And for me to give him a medical record that's redacted in medical language means nothing to him. Although he's very interested in medical terminology, it still is very confusing for him. If he had the child adoption assessment that you're going to get today, which actually lays it out in a understandable way with information, you've probably gotten them for your kids. And, at some point, those are going to be really meaningful for your kids to understand their story. And, so that's the reason behind it.
Just because we talked about reasonable efforts, and that's from social services standpoint. But if you have a guardianship, the easiest ways for like a private adoption, if you're in a guardianship and you want to not re-extend the adoption and just do a termination of parental rights and adopt the child, the quickest way, the easiest ways to do that are if parents haven't had contact for 1 year. So 1 year of no contact, the parents aren't providing support, or just that general lack of, so no contact is the easiest way because that's the most typical. But so for example, like in our family, we have to decide, what are we going to do? Are we going to re-up and petition the court to extend our guardianship for another 3 years? Are we going to ask the court to terminate parental rights and move forward with an adoption? And then every time we petition for one of those new court cases, the court appoints a guardian ad litem to look in, to make decisions, to investigate on the child's best interest. But ultimately, it's always up to the judge to decide. Yeah. So it'll be their tribal rules. Yeah, this is a state guardianship, but if your guardianship's through the tribe, then it'll be tribal rules. They may have like a long-term permanent guardianship.
So also, if your child is in custody of the state, there's a lot of stuff that has to happen before a tribal guardianship can be awarded. The tribe will not award guardianship most of the time if you are not living on the reservation. So if you guys live in Bismarck or Mandan, you're not eligible for tribal guardianship. You would be eligible for guardianship through us, through our court system, which limits it to 3 years. But tribal guardianship has to go through tribal court, and they don't do that. Even for family members who live off the reservation, they have to go through their court system instead of the tribe. Mm-hmm. You and the court. Yes, the state. Yep.
Court to the court and let them know how the child's doing, what the contact with the parent is, what visitation, what financial expenses you've had, have they made a lot of money? Has the child made a lot? Not necessarily. I don't want to say that with Amanda sitting next to me. most of,
is pretty self-explanatory.
yeah. And you just go to, I mean, after the 3 years, you go into court and they'll have a review hearing and you say, we haven't seen mom or dad in 3 years. This child still is in need of protection. We still want to. No. It stays with the state and you have to go back and just review with the state. There is a ton of conflict over that.
Especially
And the majority of the guardianships in the Bismarck Mandan area are private guardianships. They are not through the zone. And when they changed the law and they said, we want a guardian ad litem and these are all going to be really easy and everybody's in agreement. It was a big lie. And the majority of them are custody battles basically that are going on. And so you're making a custody assessment on what is in the best interest of this child. You're helping with parenting plans. You're helping with visitation. We walk a fine line between case management and guardian ad litem. And so we're constantly kind of, how do we stop what we need to do, but what does the child need in this situation? So it's a constant evaluation. And
it actually brings up an interesting point because now North Dakota does have third-party custody. I did a custody for a grandma as well. She did joint custody with her daughter, and they have joint parenting time of the child. So it brings in an interesting aspect that you can do custody orders, which are permanent until changed by the court. And then it kind of bypasses having to do a guardianship every 3 years. Right. Yeah. So it depends on like in our guardianship, it was a private guardianship. So we have guardianship, but we could petition the court for custody, and do it in family court and then not have to re-up every 3 years. And we just have custody of this child as a third party custodian. The applications are the same. Guardianship and in custody, it's similar because parents have parental rights and you don't get a subsidy typically from the county when you do those private exchanges because the parents are responsible to pay child support, whether it's custody arrangement or whether it's guardianship, private guardianship. So the parents are liable to pay child support. We don't seek child support for our parents because we know they can't pay. But if you have a parent that is working, that you would have a child support case along with your guardianship or along with your custody case. If you choose.
Okay, you guys, it's after 8:00. So we're gonna have to call this for the evening here. Yeah, so phase 2, interested in, the feedback from the room on, hearing back from you on what questions went unanswered so we can get the right people if it's some of these same people in January, new people, more people, whatever we have to do. I think it's really important. And then we didn't, they alluded to some of the redesign efforts, but redesign efforts on adoption and kinship. Other redesign efforts? Not yet. Coming soon. So hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully you learned something new out of this. Oh, yes.
Yes, you have to show
A video quickly. And I'm sorry for those who are virtual. We cannot get this to play through the system. We're just not that cool in the room here, but we linked both links to the reels and another link. I can't remember what it's called, but they are in the chat. We'll be posting them out in the event on Facebook too, so you can take a look. So please, if you're virtual, don't feel like you have to hang on for what you cannot possibly hear at all. But yep.
Okay. Yep. So the first one you're going to see is what's called a REEL, R-E-E-L. And AASK is now collaborating with an organization out of the state of Wisconsin, the Real Hope Project. And their project is all about doing these reels for waiting children as an effort to recruit families as well as help custodians introduce that child to relatives and so forth. So this child, Axel, is Peggy's kid. No. And he is the first reel that we've done. We have Real Hope is now in 6 states. It's in Wisconsin, Minnesota, North Dakota, Idaho, Wyoming, and Colorado. And so Axel is the first reel that we've had, and he is got tons of families interested in him. So we're not showing you this as a way to recruit, because. Oh, okay. So go ahead. So this is our first reel from the Real Hope Project.
I would describe myself athletic. My favorite hobby would be football and wrestling. Football makes me feel excited. My favorite position is wide receiver, because you get more running than all the other positions. Yes, I want to be an NFL star, and I want to get the trophy of the MVP, and in college I want the Heisman Trophy. Teamwork's important because if you're struggling on a move or something, somebody who knows that move can help you out, and then it's basically teamwork makes the dream work. My favorite football team is the Buccaneers. I like the Buccaneers because of Tom Brady, pretty much. Because he was the GOAT and he threw the most yardage in NFL. But yeah, he's like the best QB. I would say I'm funny and I'm brave and like to do a lot of things. I'm proud of my work I've done my whole life and my improvements I've made. Because my coaches are really good. They teach me really hard work. Family's important because the parents, they parent you, they take care of you, they feed you. You can have fun and play around and horse around. I would say like adoption, and why it's important, it's because the person who adopts you really would care about you and like do the same thing as a parent would, just like somebody else. My name is Axel, I'm 9 years old, and this is my reel.
So we wanted you to be aware of the Real Hope. If you have a child in your home that there is recruitment going on, the AASK worker may talk about this as one of the options that they're going to use for recruitment. And the Real Hope Project will make all the arrangements. In this case, they made all the arrangements for him to be up at the bowl. That's where they filmed it. They got him the Tom Brady shirt. I hear he was quite impressed with. And so they do all the arrangements, and it's at no cost to the state because the Real Hope Project is funded through donations. So it's really exciting for us to be able to use this in addition to all the other kinds of recruitment tools that we have in the past. So this is one more new thing. So do you have the second one? The second one we're going to show, there is a whole new Adopt US Kids has been collaborating with the Ad Council nationally to develop PSAs. And you might see some of these over the years. You might see them on, I've seen them on the Food Network channel and, some of those nationally as well. But these are PSAs, and this year's PSAs are around the topic of adopting from adolescents from foster care and how that's benefit to families as well as the children who are being adopted. So that we'll do that top one.
My name's Stacy, I'm 57, and I was adopted in 2020.
I'm Sandra, this is Jorge, and we were adopted in 2019.
We were adopted in 2020.
And we were adopted in 2021.
A lot of stuff was fulfilling my life, but there was something missing.
We had a house, and it sounds crazy, but it wasn't a home. The one thing that Jake and Emma brought is it became a home.
When we first met Todd, he was singing a song, and I was like, wow, look at this kid with the biggest smile.
When I met Dakota, he had just turned 14.
You weren't there for the first this and the first that. I missed the first words, but we got a lot of other firsts.
Watching her say, oh my God, I cannot believe I got my license. And she's like, I passed. And I'm like, girl.
There are unbelievable
rewards for adopting teens.
To see them grow, it is.
They chose to love us. They didn't have to. They chose us. Family.
What I thought was a complete life was nowhere near complete, but it is now.
Surprise!
Thanks. You and you.
She has a really kind and beautiful heart.
Okay.
She tells me a lot that I'm capable of anything.
Because you are.
You know, he's my father, so I look up to him a lot.
Kids in the middle.
If I can be 10% of the man he is, I'll be a happy person for sure.
Learn about adopting a teen from foster care. You can't imagine the reward. Visit adoptuskids.org.
You can also go on YouTube and search Adopt US Kids, and you can see all of them. There are actually PSAs for each of those families and years of PSAs. So if you are sleepless some night and you just want to be encouraged, it's a good thing to scan. Thanks.
Let's give everybody that was on our panel a round of applause.